Our Last Days in Barcelona by Cleeton, published by Berkeley, which is an imprint of Penguin. This is kind of like the third story of the Perez sisters, who have been living in Cuba but have had to flee because of Fidel Castro, and it puts their stories within the context of the wider family. So Next Year in Havana is the first one in the series, and When We Left Cuba is the second, and this is the third one. And the author says that she received so many messages after the last two, or the first two, that she was persuaded to pick up the story and really look at Beatriz's story in the context of sister Isabel. Now, the sisters have lost a brother who was murdered, and so there's a lot of kind of depth of feeling, and I would say that I was compelled to pick up this story because of the title and because of the author, because I really enjoyed the first two books. She's a very strong author, she pens a good story, and she introduces a reader to perhaps a period of history and countries that you don't necessarily know that much about. Beatriz in the 1960s has now headed off to Barcelona, and it seems that she might be working for some clandestine organisation, possibly the CIA, and she has very sort of secretive work to undertake. But one day she just doesn't get in touch with her family, and Isabel, another sister, is very worried for her and therefore decides to take off, fly without her husband over to Barcelona and see if she can track down her sister, really basically on a whim. She wanders around, she has her suitcase, and she gains access to the apartment block and gets up to the floor on which her sister lives and finds the door open, and she walks in, and Diego is there, who's someone she also knows, and the two of them wonder where Beatriz has absconded to. She's been taken, has she disappeared? They happen to find her date book, and in it they know that she has recently been to Camilla's. Diego happens to know that Camilla's is not in Barcelona but down in Marbella, so they head off in their cabriolet down to see if they can track her down there. Back in the 1930s, we know that the Spanish Civil War is in full swing, and part of the story is set there, and it has to somehow join up with what's going on in the 1960s. So it's kind of setting a background story for what's going on in the 1960s. It is a very difficult period. Cuba has had its very difficult history. Spain is now going through this history, and we discover what is actually happening to the characters and their backstories, and how this might influence what is going on for the stories set in the 1960s. We very much know that this author is a very talented and strong writer. She can pen a very good story, and we see evidence of that in the first and the second one, which set the background story for Our Last Days in Barcelona. But this is a problematic novel because it's very loosely woven, and sometimes it's very difficult to see how the two stories marry up. It's kind of loosely knit, I guess is the best way I can describe it. And there are too many coincidences which, propel the storyline along. And it just doesn't feel kind of real. It feels like an easy way to push the story along. There's not a lot of background why one woman particularly would leave her husband, and it just feels superficial rather than a really nitty-gritty story of love, loss, war, and leaving home. Now, this is not the only problem with this novel, because the editing is poor on this one, and I don't know whether they've almost sent the wrong version to the printer, but there are repetitive descriptions of people slightly widening their eyes, and it happens again and again, so it almost becomes a game to pick up when the next one's going to be there. And at one point a couple arrives at a hotel, they arrive at the hotel, another couple of paragraphs, and again they arrive at the hotel. So I really don't know what's been going on here, because this is a really good publisher, and it shouldn't happen. it detracts from the story. So overall, I felt I really quite struggled with this book, which is a shame because I know this author is really a strong author. So Our Last Days in Barcelona wasn't a particular hit with me, but you know, it has a lot of good reviews on Amazon and elsewhere, so you know, don't take my word for it.